We will be going right back to these hearings, but before that, I do want to go to my friend and colleague, Bret Baier, a special report, best-selling author. Bret, the one thing that struck me just talking to Leon Panetta is that he thinks we're returning to Afghanistan, that eventually we'll have to return. What did you make of that?
Well, he's a guy that knows a lot. Former CIA director, former defense secretary, someone who works with Republicans and Democrats, and who knows the world. And the reality is that terrorism is going to be a problem in some place that is a witch's brew of radical Islamic terrorists, and that is the Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. A couple of things, Neil, to note about Secretary Blinken's testimony and the questioning here. Towards the end, when you had questions about how many Americans are on the ground, the number keeps coming back to roughly 100. Well, it's been roughly 100 for a couple of weeks from the administration, even after those two flights from Doha went to Qatar from Kabul. Now it's still at roughly 100. So that number seems to be unsatisfying for Republicans, especially on that committee. Two was several thousand green card holders. How many is several thousand? Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 5? And did we try to get them out or not? And that is a real question. When asked about SIVs, the special immigrant visa holders, there is no number. They're trying to get a handle, the secretary said. Well, we're told that that number is tens of thousands. So now you're looking at a situation where the people who helped us for 2 decades on the ground, who are threatened by the Taliban, are really running for their lives still. And we can't get a firm number on what that is or what we're doing to get them out.
Do you think the secretary is still safe in his job, that he won't be fired?
Well, I think in this point, Leon Panetta is exactly right, that it's President Biden who, if he determines that Blinken, who is his long time aide, is safe, he's safe. I'm surprised that there haven't been other resignations in other parts of this chain, because this really was a horrible thing, from the intelligence that prevented them from knowing the Taliban was gaining this to the actual implementation. You saw Secretary Blinken say, we inherited a deadline, but we didn't inherit a plan as far as withdrawal. That doesn't cut it, Neil, because they inherited a deadline negotiated with conditions-based negotiations, as pointed out by some of the Republicans, of May 1st. But then they renegotiated that deal to make it September 11th. They renegotiated it, but they didn't, in the interim, come up with a plan about how to get Americans and other people out by that date, which is what led to the situation that we saw.
Yeah, I've always wondered how specious an argument that was, because think about it, Bret, the Biden administration came in ripping up all sorts of deals and actions taken by the prior administration, so why stop at this particular one when it was indeed adjusted, to your point? I guess what I'm asking is, we could put a forward sort of spin on this now, Bret, is this notion that the Taliban will continue cooperating with us, working with us to get these 100 or so Americans out, these thousands of Afghan nationals out. The latter seems a little bit of a steep climb here. But in the interim, the vacuum is filled by the Chinese, Russians, others. How do you see this playing out for the administration?
Listen, hope is a plan, I suppose, but hope is not the best thing for the people that are stuck on the ground. And trusting the Taliban, that has a pretty bad record, Neil, is thin as far as wanting to get real results. I think there's an effort, obviously, that continues every day, and there's also a private effort that continues with former special ops officers, and we've heard a lot about that in recent days. But how this is going from a government perspective, it is not well. And we are talking about the Taliban differently than we're talking about pretty much anybody else.
Finally, one point you mentioned earlier about, it seems a bit incredulous to think that, the Secretary of State wouldn't know an exact number, but I'll take him at his word that it's roughly 100 Americans, as he said, that it's, a few thousand here, could be a lot more foreign nationals who work with us. But wouldn't that be something a Secretary of State would know down to the exact person and last person?
They're arguing that it fluctuates day to day. People get out. We find some more people that are trying to get out. Fine. give them the benefit of the doubt. But the real number is in the thousands of people that we should be getting out. If you talk to anybody in this business, including Leon Panetta, who said we have an obligation to those people on the ground. The one thing I thought Secretary Panetta said that I don't know if I jive with by the people I talked to in the military circles and also up on Capitol Hill is that would it have been the exact same under a Trump administration, how this went? I don't think that's possible because as bad as this went, there were conditions baked into the Taliban withdrawal, and I'm pretty sure, just judging by the people who are talking about it, that they wouldn't have left all these people on the ground. But we are where we are, and looking to the future, you got to get those people out.
So that the Taliban, if it were to actively start taking over large swaths of the country in this interim leading up to the deadline, they would not have countenanced that.
Well, there were, in the deal itself, there were loopholes that said, if you do this, the thing's over and we get to decide when we're leaving. The deadline was not firm if they didn't meet up with their obligations. They were not already meeting up with those obligations. And now to say that the Taliban suddenly is going to be trusted, even though the document that they signed they never lived up to, but now they're going to be trusted to get all of these people out, again, is a lot of hope. But we'll see. We'll cover all sides.
All right. Thank you very much. Bret Baier, good catching up with you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.